So firstly, we might look at the market in general and some of the trends that you're currently seeing in the market, and particularly in the area of disability.
Well, been in the market since '87 in one way or another, and in that time Ireland has gone through economic down in the dumps to boom times, and now back in the dumps again. And so the pattern that we saw in the late 1980s, early 1990s is kind of re-emerging now.
Okay.
And that is when the economy goes down, the numbers of claims go up.
Okay.
And certainly back in the 80s, several of the life offices in Ireland who sold quite a bit of disability insurance got badly hurt, and indeed some of them almost went out of business because the disability claims started to go up. So we're noticing in the last while the numbers of claims, numbers of those on long-term disability beginning to go up. It seemed to be less of an issue during the boom years, whilst there were several people, out sick for prolonged periods of time, and they were out generally, for the most part, during the boom years. Stress seemed to be a big issue, maybe stress related to workload at the time when times were good, but now all causes of disability are beginning to emerge, and the patterns that we saw in the late 1980s, early 1990s is certainly re-emerging as a cause of disability.
Okay, and the top maybe 2 or 3, I suppose, areas of claims, are they the same, or have they changed, or have the percentages changed?
By and large the same, though the percentages have changed.
Yeah.
So I remember back in 1995 I undertook a thesis on disability and heart disease, and as part of that I took a life office and looked at all their causes of disability over a 1-year period. And at the time, about 20% of claims were mental illness, about 30%, 35% were orthopedic, there was about 10% neurological, 15 to 20% cardiovascular. And that was 1995. The next time I looked at it was in the early 2000s, the early noughties, about which time we were looking at a third. And the third being mental illness in its broadest categories, including chronic fatigue and the like, a third being locomotor, musculoskeletal, and a third everything else. And more recently, that pattern is re-emerging again, and we're seeing it again, but I suppose it would be fair to say mental illness has gone from about a third to perhaps 40%, and then 30% locomotor and 30% other.
In the area of, say, stress and depression, what are some of the effective treatments, both at an early stage and maybe as maybe the claim, I suppose, develops?
From a point of view of underwriting or claims management?
Yes.
Well, tools that we would use, when you're looking at managing depression, managing absence from work, particularly due to mental illness, number one is early intervention. Early intervention is most importantly. And one of the difficulties that an insurer therefore often has is that early intervention isn't possible because defer periods may be 26 weeks, 3 months, something like that. So it takes some time before the insurer gets notified there's an issue. And if somebody's out for 3 months or 6 months by the time you're notified, a pattern has set in and a person has adopted a sick role and it becomes difficult to manage. So really it comes down to getting the employer to intervene early to try and break cycles such as early mental illness. So the sort of things that work are identifying that a person's got a problem, and that's often down to a colleague saying, Joe Soap's not well, he's not performing well, referring that to HR, and then getting them to either get their GP who works in the place, or referring to their own GP, or getting their occupational physician involved. And early intervention, managing the individual, seems to make a difference. Certain companies have schemes in place, employee assistance programs, for example. And these, unfortunately to date, haven't been clearly demonstrated reducing absenteeism or reducing absenteeism associated with stress. However, it is very clear that they demonstrate that the employer cares. And it would be fair to say that of all the people that we see from various different companies as an occupational physician, if the company we're seeing the individual from has an employee assistance program, they regard the company better as being, I don't mean more patronly, but a more caring company
on their side,
than would a company that doesn't provide it. So it certainly gets the impression that the company cares for me, and that is perhaps more likely to encourage the individual back to work sooner. Unfortunately, the data doesn't quite support that yet, but the big studies haven't yet been done.
And some of the external factors that are actually out there in the environment that you're seeing, that are causing stress and depression. What are the...
Well, they're changing.
Yes.
Okay, they're changing with the change in the economy. So, an interesting study, a colleague of mine, Dr Ryan, ran there recently on a group of employees from one particular profession who were out sick because they were claiming they had work-related stress, for example. So just look at work-related stress. But actually, when he went into it and examined 150 of these particular type of employee with work-related stress, only about 20% of them had true work-related stress.
Okay.
So what are the real stressors out there? Well, they're usually family,
Yeah.
relationships at home, economic pressures, and those are problems with children. They're the sort of pressures that are causing the greater bulk of stress, but they often get labelled as occupational stress. But we are seeing more stress at the moment, and it's often, a lot of it is financial because of the change in economic times. Some of it is work-related. A lot of companies have got to the stage where during the boom times they had a lot of employees who were underperforming and who were perhaps out sick for prolonged periods of time, but times were busy. Their whole aim was get people in, recruit, and now that times are hard and they're looking at their costs, they're saying, well, hold on, this guy's been out sick now for a long time, let's get him looked at, let's get him assessed.